Tulikuwa vijana, tulicheza na masomo, kazi ya watoto kweli kila siku ni kucheza. Tulikuwa vijana, tulicheza na masomo, kazi ya watoto kweli kila siku ni kucheza. Someni vijana, muongeze pia bidii, mwisho wa kusoma mtapata kazi nzuri sana. Someni vijana, muongeze pia bidii, mwisho wa kusoma mtapata kazi nzuri sana. Waliokosa kusoma wafanye kazi na nguvu, waambie watoto mwisho wa kusoma kweli furaha. Waliokosa kusoma wafanye kazi na nguvu, waambie watoto mwisho wa kusoma kweli furaha. Someni vijana, muongeze pia bidii, mwisho wa kusoma mtapata kazi nzuri sana. Someni vijana, muongeze pia bidii, mwisho wa kusoma mtapata kazi nzuri sana.
Once again, welcome to the Shepherd's Voice channel. Today, I want to travel together on this journey of discussing pertinent issue that has affected society, that has disrupted the normal functioning of families, individuals, organizations, governments in various ways. My topic this afternoon is about school post-COVID-19 hopelessness. The mention of the word hopelessness, I'm sure, creates in most of us various, it ignites various feelings. When somebody finds himself or herself in a state of hopelessness, it is that they don't know what to do, how to confront the issue before them. When the COVID-19 virus hit society late in 2019, did people know what its effects look like? Majority of households, governments, families were scared on the basis of the information that was laid in the social media, in all types of media about this unique virus. I want to narrow my talk specifically to schools, learning institutions, and more so schools, primary and secondary schools. In the normal situation, when schools close, teachers and learners do a transition process. Learners are prepared to exit school to go back to the parents in a manner that guides them on what will be expected of them while at home till they resume back to school. The situation was not the same in 2020. Because of the devastating effects of the COVID-19 virus, schools hurriedly closed. Learners were sent home abnormally. The normal procedure was not followed in preparation for the normal school vacation. This was not a normal school vacation. The term had not ended, and the teachers and the learners did not have enough time to prepare on how to exit from school to home. Likewise, parents were so much scared when information was relayed that the schools were closing because of the COVID-19 virus. Normally, uh, the teachers in institutions guide the learners on what is expected of them while they are at home. They normally accompanied with homework, research, you know, papers to go and research on, information to go and look for while they are at home. And the vacation normally finds them organized, prepared, and functioning in a more organized manner. This time, however, things were completely different. As the learners were hurriedly, given a chance to go back to their homes, parents on their part were not ready or prepared to receive their children, whom for a long time, they are not used to staying with them for quite a long time. This therefore means the parents were not ready, they were not prepared, they did not know how to engage their land and for how long these children were to be at home. While the children were at home, because of the unpreparedness of both the child and the parent, children resumed various roles. They played the role of a parent, they played the role of caregiver, businessman, businesswoman, house girl, houseboy, and engaged in various forms of activities. Remember, these children were at home for 9 good months. And that of school period completely distorted the learner's mind. Some went so much into business, various forms of business. Border riders, hawking, doing small, engaging in small enterprise that was able to gain them some little income. So, for this 9 month period, the learners completely got detached from the normal routine of what a learner is. They disengaged their minds from the normal learner school situation to home, parent, caregiver, businessman, businesswoman, hawker, name it. Their minds, therefore, got completely, engaged in these forms of business, various forms of business. It's a period when the learners had what we call self-regulation. They had freedom that they were not used to. They could wake up at the time they wanted, do whatever they wanted at whatever time without much supervision. Therefore, it was a period of self-decision making. And this is because the parent was left running up and down, trying to hustle to meet the expenses of the learners at home that they were not prepared for. In the normal situation, the parent was used to a program that they only stay with the learners for 3 weeks, at most 1 month. 3 weeks, the learners go back for 3, 4 months. 3 weeks, the learners go back to school 3, 4 months. Therefore, the preparation they used to have wasn't much like it was during the 2020 year. Therefore, when time came that the learners were supposed to go back to school, the same way these learners left school for home is the same way the learners again were recalled back to school. In as much as the government, society, schools did not prepare these children for home the same way they were not prepared to come back to school, to resume back to school. Remember, after engaging in various forms of activities that were not learner related at all, these children felt this was a more freer environment, an environment that gave them freedom to choose what to do and what not to do, when, how, where, with very little supervision. So therefore, they had become lords of their own lives, managers of their own lives, with little restriction, few rules, if any. In some households, sometimes the children could get away from home and stay away for 1, 2, 3 days without the knowledge of parents, get back home with very little explanations, and therefore they develop a culture of self-regulation. On the resumption of schools in 2021, there are very important and pertinent issues that society and the government at large needed to look at. There should have been that dialogue of what the child had gone through, of what the effects of the ninth period had on the behavior, mindset, character, way of thinking of this child, so that we could be able to know where this child was before they could be sent back to school. In the same way, the teacher was supposed to have been prepared for this abnormal, learner who was coming back to school after 9 months. That was not done. Therefore, what effect did this have? What effect has this one had on both the school, the learner, the parent, and society? Now, if you can recall some of the comments from the CS education, the concerns that society has had, that many of these learners, a good number of them, had become parents. Pregnancy rates went so high. These were children who were not prepared to be parents. But because of the situation they found themselves in, now here they are. They're supposed to go back to school when some of them were expectant mothers who are learners, both in primary and secondary schools. So therefore, you expect a true situation where learners are of diverse positions. Here is one learner who is expectant, one learner who has not been at home, who has been engaged in business. How do you harmonize? How do you bring them back to the normal routine of the school? How do you bring back their minds from being a parent, from being a caregiver, from being a housekeeper, house girl, houseboy, name it, a border rider, a hawker? back to the classroom. So these children, therefore, were not prepared emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, and all round for back to school. The transition back to school was not done. The moment the learners were back in school, the school routines started applying. And remember, you're applying this routine on a mind that has been away for 9 months. The sudden introduction of rules, restrictions, bells, commands, times, name it, really had to be resisted by the learners in different ways. We should have expected this one to happen, and therefore we should have been better prepared as society to put strategies in place so that when this learner gets back to school, they get back to school when their mindset had been changed. Now, in school, remember again, the learners again were reintroduced more so to meal times that they had forgotten for almost a period of 1 year. Eating at specific times, eating very little. When at home, they were used to eating a lot of food, the food they prefer to eat at whatever time, cooking for themselves. Good food, a lot of eating at all times and time, and then to specific times when they are eating and very little food. The child was not prepared for this. Therefore, that abrupt change brought in the scenes that we are witnessing in our schools today. Remember, rebellion that is being witnessed, for various forms of dissent being experienced, burning down of schools, dormitories, name it, some of them even going to the extent of stabbing their teachers, going to school with various forms of weapons. It's an indicator of a bigger problem. When we see dormitories burning, learners going back to school with knives, rebelling that they do not want their administrators, some of them walking out of school. They want their principals, their teachers to be transferred. This is just but a tip of the iceberg. The bigger problem is underneath, and we need to go deeper to find out. Telling the teachers to ensure that there are no sanitizers in the dormitories is just but, it's just a temporal measure until we get back deep into the problem. These problems will keep on recurring and recurring in different forms and getting even worse as time goes by and by. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say this. What could society have done? Where have we gone wrong as society? Where have we gone wrong as institutions? Where have we gone wrong as the government? Our leaders need to sit down and look at society as the learner, as an individual who also is not only part of the problem, but also part of the solution. The moment we come to that realization that the person we are discussing about so much as a problem is also the solution. What have we done to engage these children, these learners? How much time did we take to find out what they went through? How they feel, what they feel, how ready they are to go back to school, what needs to be done for them to be comfortable when they resume back to school. Do you think it is important to engage them in such a dialogue? The moment we sit and only come up and we draft rules, strict rules, those rules do not mean much until the person that we are interested in becomes part and parcel of the whole process, of the entire process. The teacher, on their part, strict and very, very clear instructions by the ministry on what they need to do and what they must do within the limited time to ensure that the syllabus that was never covered is covered, to ensure that they use every time and resource available to take these learners through the entire curriculum, to ensure that the learners are safe during the day, at night, in the classroom, in their hostels, in their dormitories. This means this same teacher must assume various roles. At some point in time, they must be the teacher. At other times, the parent. At other times, the judge. At other times, the pastor or the reverend. At other times, the policeman. At other times, the watchman. You know, how do you expect this person to perform, to do all these ones without, suffering burnout? The same teacher has been hit by the COVID-19 in various ways. They have been at home the same period the children were at home. Nevertheless, as we expected them to perform all these roles effectively, remember the learner, who is the vocal point in all this, is left out when all these things are said and done. I want to take you through some of what approaches possibly we could borrow from that can help us to deal with this abnormal situation. Now, what I propose, ladies and gentlemen, is to operationalize counseling in our schools. Not just a matter of assuming that because there's a room somewhere, that because there is an elder teacher in the school, these services can be able to be offered. No. Can we operationalize, functional counseling in our schools? This is what our schools require. This is what our schools need. This will supplement the efforts of the teacher. This will fill that gap that is left. That when the teacher is handling the academic bit of it, there should be somebody who will be able to really reach into these children to find out the issues, the challenges, both academic, social, in their lives, affecting them in one way or another. Ladies and gentlemen, on this note, I want to give a few examples of what we can borrow from and what may help deal with the abnormal situation that we are experiencing in our schools. This state of hopelessness as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, I want to borrow from some of the counseling theories, what they propose, and what that means for our schools, for our learners, how we can be able to bring it down to handle the abnormal situation that we are experiencing in our learning institutions. Now, I would look at the six, perspectives, counseling perspectives that can be of help, that can be used to address this abnormal situation in our schools. Now, one of the theories, we call them humanistic theories of counseling. Now, what does this theory propose? What does this school of thought propose? Now, this approach now looks at people, views people, you know, uh, proposes that people have within themselves the necessary resources that are required to make them become functional and healthy human beings. That the problems, the challenges, the issues that come up, that occur, are as a result of the restricted or unavailable problem solving resources. What am I saying? From this perspective, people, our learners in schools, within themselves, they have the resources. The schools have the resources that they need to make them become functional and healthy learners, to live healthy without banning dormitories, wanting to stab their teachers, and doing all sorts of things that will end up affecting their lives. Now, the problem only comes when they feel there are no resources, or the resources are restricted, or the resources are unavailable that will help them to solve the problem, the challenges that they are facing. Now, what role then do we need to play if we use this approach in our schools? How do we make our learners to realize the potentials, the resources that they have, that will be able to assist them to address the challenges that they face? Now, if counseling was operationalized and made to be functional, now this very important service will help these learners to discover and access within themselves the restricted resources that they have to address the challenges that they have, to solve their own issues. But the moment that one is not done, the moment we want to direct them on what to do and how to solve the problems that they have, then the end result will be this rebellion. The end result will be wanting to stab the teachers because the teachers are directing them on what they think they should do. And most of the times, what the teachers think the learners need to do to address the issues which are facing them may not work, may not be appropriate. Because the learner understands their position where they are. Now, let me give an example. This child was come to school. They are expectant. It is a situation they did not prepare for. And me as a teacher in school, I'm trying to prescribe for them what I think should work, directing them on how they should behave, what they should do, what they should not do. Remember, it is the learner who knows what they are going to do. It is the learner who understands what will be done to help them create an environment in which they will feel supported, understood, and then guided. That's what will work, ladies and gentlemen. That's what I'm saying. It is lacking in our schools. If the government could pool its resources, operationalize counseling in our schools, get the right personnel to supplement the work of the teacher, then shall we indeed address what we are witnessing in our schools. That's one perspective. The second perspective is a view, that holds that people sometimes experience psychological and emotional difficulties, when their thinking is not or is out of sync with reality. Whenever there are distortions, what happens to this human being? What happens to this learner? They are going to face both emotional and psychological problems. When their mind gets to a dead end, when they feel the heat is too much, they experience, issues that make them sometimes feel, out of touch with reality. Then what is the outcome? It is outbursts. The principal is not nice. Teacher so and so is not good enough. This and these meals were not well cooked. It is because the way of thinking, their cognitive perspective is not in sync with reality. It's out of sync with reality. Now, how do we help these learners to deal with such situations? To be able to live that healthy life. Now, if counseling was functional, what happens is that that service will be able to challenge these clients, the learners fully, their faulty thinking, their wrong thinking patterns, so that they are able to look for solutions, to create solutions that are accurate and which really address the problems they are experiencing. Now, let me give an example of what I watched on TV the other day. One of our schools, the students were out, walking out and, complaining, protesting against the situation in which they are. It's a child who exactly knows what will work for them. It's their principal. Now, what was the reason? It is that, the culture of the school is known. As from force, for example, in the past, we have been eating meat 4 times a week. That was their complaint. Now, they are not eating that meat as many times as they have been doing in the past. Now, look at the perspective of this land. They have not come into touch with the reality that 2021 is coming out, is trying to read out of the effects of COVID-19. Parents have been so much hit. Society has been so much hit. Everybody is really hit. It's now an abnormal situation. We are trying to get back to our normal functioning. And there are some of the things that we must change, not because we want to change, but because it is necessary, it is important that we change them. That this is a situation that demands for different ways of doing things. We cannot continue eating meat 4 times a week because this is what we are used to doing in the past. The current situation demands that we must come up with measures on how to deal with this abnormal situation before life comes back to normalcy. So therefore, how does this learner get back to that reality? It's until the services are offered, they are challenged, their way of thinking is challenged to bring them into, in sync with the reality. That what is the reality on the ground? Yes, you want to eat meat 4 times a week. What does it mean in terms of cost? What does it mean in terms of the upkeep? What does it mean in terms of what the parent needs to do to afford that type of lifestyle? And when this engagement is done in an honest, conducive, open environment, when the learner feels accepted, free to be engaged, to share, ladies and gentlemen, the schools would be banned up. They will be burnt up. But if the learners were engaged in that very, very free, conducive environment, the child will be able to see their false thinking will be challenged, and then they will come up with, solutions which are real, which are in tandem with reality. School hopelessness during the post-COVID period. The principals are feeling hopeless. They are in a state of hopelessness. When one school realizes that the other school, the students are at home because they have not been eating meet the number of times they used to do before COVID-19 came in. Another one and another one will come up to join their colleagues, thinking that because they have protested and they have gone home, now schools must give in. And if they give in, when society giving without making these learners realize why, it must not be 4 times, maybe it must be 2 times because of the situation, then this happens, this reaction, this rebellion will always come up and come up, regardless of how many times we are going to send these children home, come back, go home, come back, every now and again. Now, I'm wondering whether the schools engage the learners after resumption of studies. That look here, there are some of the things and some of the programs, there are some of the activities that we have engaged in the past. When COVID-19 hit, these are the effects that it has had on individuals, on institutions, on the government. What the government used to give as grants to subsidize what the parents pay as school fees is being affected so much. The government now cannot be able to afford. Therefore, when the learner is made to understand that if that type of lifestyle must be maintained, then the parent must pull up their socks. And how do they pull up their socks? By paying more. When now they look inside, look at the homes they have come from, see the extent to which the parents have stretched, then will these learners say, yes, indeed, we must operate different. That perspective, ladies and gentlemen, normally children, human beings, engage in problematic behaviors, way of thinking, when their environment supports that. Now we're looking at behavior as another perspective. Now look at the learners engaging in the various forms of behaviors in schools: banning, trying to stab the teacher, abusing, name it. Now, how do they engage in that behavior? When do they engage in this problematic way of thinking that they can go as well as, abusing their teachers, wanting to stab their teachers, banning the dormitories, without much thinking? How do these children arrive at that point? Where do these behaviors come from? Where does this way of thinking come from? It comes from if the environment looks like it supports, then therefore these people, these learners will automatically engage in that way of thinking. Now, I want us to go back to a few years as a nation. In the past, we have seen our leaders, our politicians, when they cannot advance their views, when their views, for them it is either their way or the highway. If their views are not bought, then they have another way of trying to force their things out. In the past, we have seen politicians engaging in what we are seeing in our schools. We have seen politicians leading Kenyans, the youth, in burning tiles along the roads, protesting, throwing stones, abusing, because it must be their way or the highway. If it's not their way, then their way is the option. This is what society has tolerated. This is what the Kenyan society has tolerated for some time. When our children now are engaging in similar behaviors, in similar ways of thinking, which of course is problematic, is faulty, it's distorted, it's not realistic, do we blame them? Who should carry the blame? It's a reflection of us as society. Us as leaders is what we have been doing. Why do we think that our children will do what is different from what we do? What type of role models have we been as leaders? So for them now, it's either their way or the highway. It's either they are getting beat 4 times or they ban the school or they walk out of school. The schools must give in. That's what they have learned. That's what society supports. That's what the environment supports. And when all of us watch on TV with our children at home, we are saying, yes, because it is my party, that's the right thing to do. And what are you told your child? The moment it is in school now, it is either if their way is not the way, then there are other ways, other avenues. And these are the avenues that these children have resorted into. Now, how do we solve this problem? This type of wrong thinking behaviors in our schools is by trying to identify those things that reinforce and support these type of behaviors and patterns which are not acceptable. That they should be able to understand that the burning of school property, coming to school with, weapons, engaging in unacceptable behavior is something that we do not support, we do not reinforce. When that way of thinking is challenged, when they are made to understand, then we can be able now to replace that way of thinking, those patterns of thinking and behavior with new desirable patterns. Then we reinforce the desirable pattern. Which is this desirable pattern, ladies and gentlemen? If the counseling offices and services were functional in schools, that children will be able to understand that when there is an issue that they do not agree with, they have a forum where they can be able to air their undesirable ways of thinking and behaviors, and somebody will listen and be able to try to engage them to see the desirable behavior they need to engage in, and then it is enforced. If that dialogue is held, the learners will be able to know that yes, now whenever we do not agree with what is there on the ground, we don't need to engage in undesirable behaviors, patterns, but we can engage and together look for a solution to the challenge that there is. That is the missing link in our schools, ladies and gentlemen. That is what we need to do as society to be able to address the problems that are facing our schools, the status of hopelessness in both the teacher, the learner, the administration, the parent at home, society as a whole, and the government. Now, let's say that done now. When all these problems are up in our schools, in our institutions, now, let's try to find out. Let's try to engage in this fact that how do our children construct, understand the events that are happening around, the environment, around in society, in the world. How do they construct that meaning out of what is happening? How do they, while we are seeing various events in the surrounding, these events normally trigger people in coming out various meaning out of those events. They construct meaning out of the events that we see that happen within the environments, in our society, globally. They always construct meaning out of the events that are happening, all over the world, in society today, yesterday, and name it. So the question is, now in this case, it is the meaning, the way they make meaning out of what it happens, rather than the events themselves, that determine how people think, how people feel, and how people act, react, or behave. It's not really the event that determines the way people, react to events, feel about those events, but the meaning they make out of it. Now, what does that mean? Children have come back to school, they have been eating, as they have been eating meat 2, 3, 4 times a week. And all of a sudden, they come now, the menu is brought out, they are going to eat meat twice. Now, the meaning they make out of that is what will trigger the feelings, the actions, the reaction that these children are going to engage in. Not really the act of changing the number of times that they have to take meat, for example, in the school. What meaning do they make out of that event is the question. Now, when I say this, what am I trying to bring up, ladies and gentlemen? What I'm trying to say is this. Now, as schools, we need to collaborate very much with our learners to examine now and revise those, the way they construct, the way they make meaning, the way they look at themselves, the way they relate with the events that are happening in society. We must engage. We must collaboratively work with them. The moment we do not engage them, then the meaning they are going to make out of it will always be totally different from what we expect. The moment these learners are engaged, the moment they become part of the events that are happening in our institutions, in our schools, then shall we be able to minimize these events, these, reactions, these behaviors that we are witnessing. The moment these children came back to school from home, now home and schools took time to engage these learners, to find out where they are, how their feelings were, what did they go through for the 9 period they were at home, month period. What really devastated them? How did they feel? What did they go through? How much were they affected? No. What are they feeling now that they have come back to school? What can the school do to make their lives comfortable? How can they transit their mind from home to school, well, so that they can feel comfortable, so that learning can resume normally? How many schools, how many administrations did that? Likewise, how many of these, administrators had the courtesy to engage the student? Now, guys, look here. This is how we have run our business, our things before the COVID-19 pandemic set in. This is how we operated. This was our norm. But now, because of what the situation is, there are a few things that we feel that we are going to change for the good of all of us. Table those changes. Engage the learners. What is your partake of this? What do you partake of this? What is your view about these changes? Are they okay? Can we make them better than what we have on the table? The moment these learners are engaged in such a forum, and then the moment their views are brought on board, then whatever change that comes will be owned by the entire system. Validation of the systems will be there. Even the dissenting voices will be listened to, and then they will be made to understand their way of thinking, their way of interpretation, their way of meaning making, making meaning out of those events could be made to understand and agree with the rest that indeed there is need to change. And these changes are meant for the better. They are not meant to hurt, nor to derive anybody of any privileges whatsoever. But they are meant to ensure that not only the school, but even the parent at home who is struggling hard to normalize is able to also be comfortable. His interests are taken care of as they are trying so hard to make sure their children are back in school. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, when we are talking about this important uh, topic, I want to bring you the last bit of it, the last, view or perspective. Now, this perspective, is systemic in nature. When we talk about systemic, what we are thinking is that thinking, that feeling, the behavior, the thinking, the behavior, the feeling of an individual is largely shaped by the pressures that are exerted on them by the social systems within which they live. Systemic, perspective. That every individual is part and parcel of the social system. There is no learner lives in isolation. They are within a social setup. That system, that social system, really uh, defines the way this individual learner thinks. It influences the way this learner feels, the way this learner behaves. The social system determines and influences those aspects of the learner. Now, therefore, what does it mean? The individual child within that social system, their thinking, their feeling, their behavior can best be understood, you know, when we examine when we examine that learner in relation to the role that they play within that setup, within the family, within the school, within that's social setup. So we look at the learner, we look at the individual child against the backdrop of that system, that they are part and parcel. So what we are saying here, in systemic approach, now look at these children as part of the social systems, right from home to school. Now to understand their way of thinking, their way of feeling, their way of behavior, remember it is been influenced by that, the relationship and the role that this child plays, played, is playing within that setup. Either being within the family as a family member or within that social network in the school. Now, what does that, how is this relevant to the situation we're witnessing now in our schools? The relevance of this is the sense that now we need to work to revise that network, that social network, the dynamics that influence the child's undesirable thoughts, their feelings, and their behaviors. We need to work, we need to revise, we need to change that system, that network. The moment we change that network, then are we able to change the individual within that social network. We need to change the way the society as parents we are thinking and the way the pressure we are putting on our children. The moment we change it from home, the moment we change the way the parents are pressurizing their children, and then we go back to school, do the same, then are we able now to address the individual needs, the individual learner's behavior, way of thinking, and way of feeling. Now, look at the 9 months period. I want you to imagine what the pressure that the parents, the family system was putting on this child. Now, from home to school, look at the pressure that the system really puts on this learner. And how do these pressures influence the way these children think, the way they feel, the way they will react, the way they will behave? What is it that we need to change? We can be able to know that if there is an engagement, if there is dialogue, if there is trust, that the learners are able to share, to open up, and share the pressures they went through while they were at home. If the learners are free and open to share the pressures that they are going through within the school system, and how all these are influencing the way they are thinking, the way they are feeling, the way they are behaving. And then we can be able to relate those with the incidences that we are experiencing in our school. Remember, it does not take one day. The child does not just wake up in one morning from nowhere and carries a knife to school with an intention of killing their teacher. Remember, the child does not wake up one morning in school and just thinks that he wants to set the dormitory ablaze. It is not a one day event. It is a system. It is, a system. It is a whole process. And the moment we understand these processes, then can we be able to come up with strategies to address those, so that now the feelings, the thinking patterns, the behaviors can change. And the moment they change, these problems will be addressed once and for all. So, ladies and gentlemen, our schools will continue experiencing this state of hopelessness until we as a society realizes that there's something that we have not done and we must do. And the time to do it is now, not tomorrow. The moment we sit and think things will change by themselves, they are not going to change. If there will be any change, they are going to get worse. The changes will get worse and worse. So before they get out of hand, before they get out of control, my appeal will be, what is it that we can do small at school level as we wait for the government to come up with bigger problems, which is a long term process? At school level, the principals need to sit down and dialogue with the staff. After they dialogue with the staff, they engage the learners. The schools need to engage the parents. And then at that school level, they are able to start working slowly towards solution, getting solutions to the challenges that those children are facing. It's my plea, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, that we shall keep on engaging and engaging, coming up with solutions, coming up with suggestions, strategies that we think can work towards changing this state of hopelessness. Our learners need help. Our teachers need help. Our parents need help. And the only way that we can be able to meet the individual needs of the parent, of the learner, of the school, of the teacher, of the principal is through that honesty. We need counseling, not today, You need counseling now.
Someni vijana, muongeze pia bidii. Mwisho wa kusoma mtapata kazi nzuri sana. Someni vijana, muongeze pia bidii. Mwisho wa kusoma mtapata kazi nzuri sana. Siku hizi sikupigana magumi, kalamu na karatasi ndiyo silaha ya siku hizi. Mambo ya siku hizi sikupigana magumi, kalamu na karatasi ndiyo silaha ya siku hizi. Someni vijana, muongeze pia bidii. Mwisho wa kusoma mtapata kazi nzuri sana. Someni vijana, muongeze pia bidii. Mwisho wa kusoma mtapata kazi nzuri sana.